We begin with the outgoing prosecutor of the International Criminal Court asking for authority to conduct a full investigation into the Duterte government's war on drugs. Fatu Bensouda says that there is reason to believe that crimes against humanity of murder has been committed under the drug campaign from 2016 to March 2019.
But they're also taking it as far back as 2011, given the overlap in the people involved and the similarities in killings. The prosecution wants events in Davao from 2011 to 2016 to be included in the investigation. But the palace has already dismissed the prosecution's request as legally erroneous and politically motivated.
Sasayangin lang nilang panahon, sasayangin lang nilang resources ng hukuman dahil without cooperation from the Philippine state, hinding-hindi naman makakabuo ng kaso kung hindi base sa ebidensya na hearsay at galing mismo sa mga komunista at politikong kalaban ng presidente.
Good evening, I'm Gretchen Ho.
And I'm Robbie Alampay. You're watching The Big Story. Let's start with the Philippine government refusing to cooperate with the ICC's requested investigation into President Duterte's war on drugs.
The palace stressed the ICC no longer has jurisdiction over the matter, but the prosecution begs to differ. Marian Enriquez has the big story.
Legally erroneous and politically motivated. This is how the palace described the International Criminal Court's request to conduct a probe into President Duterte's bloody war on drugs. Palace spokesman Harry Roque is confident that the ICC's pre-trial chamber will reject the request. After all, the president refuses to cooperate.
This is now a political issue. Hinding-hindi magko-cooperate ang presidente hanggang tapos na kanyang termino sa June 30 of 2022.
In a 57-page document, outgoing ICC prosecutor Fatu Bensouda said that there is reasonable basis to believe that crime against humanity of murder has been committed in the Philippines since Duterte's drug war started in 2016 to March 2019. According to their data, deaths due to the campaign stand between 12 to 30,000. The carriers of the act are believed to be state actors, primarily members of the security force. Some may be vigilantes, but information suggests that they are also police officers or private citizens hired by state authorities. The prosecutor also noted the similarity of the cases with deaths reported in Davao City when President Duterte was mayor from 2011 to 2016. Roque argued that the request is invalid after the Philippines exited the Rome Statute in 2019, rendering the ICC powerless over the matter. But with the crimes occurring between November 2011 up to March 2019, Bensouda insists the ICC still has jurisdiction. But Roque insists the ICC can only intervene with such matters if the legal system of a country is not working.
Hindi po natin kinakailangan ang mga dayuhan na mag-imbestiga ng patayan dahil sa drug war, dahil gumagana po ang sistemang legal sa Pilipinas, merong mga piskal at merong mga hukumang naglilitis at nagparusa na. How dare you say that the Philippine legal system is not working?
Roque also insists there are no extrajudicial killings in the country.
Without cooperation from the Philippine state, hinding-hindi naman makakabuo ng kaso kung hindi base sa ebidensya na hearsay at galing mismo sa mga komunista at politikong kalaban ng presidente.
The Justice Department assures the public that the ICC's move will not affect their own investigation into the drug war deaths. For News 5, Marian Enriquez, we are One News.
The requested investigation by the ICC leaves a lot of questions, especially after President Duterte said that he will not cooperate with the group. To discuss this matter, joining us is Attorney Gilbert Andres, Deputy Executive Director of the Center for International Law Philippines, or Center Law. Good evening, Attorney Andres. Welcome to The Big Story.
Good evening, Robbie.
First of all, what changes here as we move from the period of inquiry and now to this request for a formal investigation? What's the difference?
I think the big difference here is that there's now a formal request by the Office of the Prosecutor to the ICCP trial chamber to give it the authority to investigate instances of crimes against humanity here in the Philippines when the Philippines was still a state party to the ICC.
Now, to that point, when the Philippines was still a party to the ICC, government is saying you have no jurisdiction because we left the ICC in 2019. What's to qualify or to understand in that statement?
Well, actually, that's inaccurate because there was a time when the Philippines was a state party. If I may use an analogy from marriage, even married couples who get a divorce, there was still a time that they were married. That's why they have custody agreements. They have alimony agreements. That's the same for the Philippines. There was a time that we were married in a sense to the ICC when we were a state party. And that was from November 1, 2011 to March 16, 2019. Hence, any international crimes that occurred in the Philippines during that period, and that's within the jurisdiction of the ICC, is really subject to the jurisdiction of the ICC.
Okay, so jurisdiction is one thing, but actual capability to carry out an investigation, especially in the country where witnesses and resources are, is still another matter. How far can the ICC go in the investigation that it seeks if even granting jurisdiction, government refuses to cooperate?
Well, okay, there are two ways to look at it. First, from a legal point of view, even though the Philippines arguably withdrew from the ICC, it still has the residual obligation to cooperate. And that's in Article 127, Paragraph 2 of the ICC Rome Statute. But number two, in the logistical challenge that the Philippines will not cooperate, then there's really a difficulty on the part of the Office of the Prosecutor how to really actualize that investigation. But I think the ICC Office of the Prosecutor has enough means and has enough power under the Rome Statute to look for creative ways and means to investigate, even if the Philippines will not cooperate.
Okay, but Gilbert, Attorney Andres, one more question. What does that mean, being creative? How exactly can the ICC compel the government to open up for investigations? And for that matter, is there proof of concept of that in other cases in other countries?
Well, actually, the ICC can invoke the residual obligation under Article 127, Paragraph 2. In fact, it's the obligation of the Philippines to cooperate, even though it's not a state party. But when I say creative means, for example, this Zoom, maybe it's one way of actually interviewing potential witnesses through online platforms. So I think the ICC, Office of the Prosecutor, will think of means that are within their capability so that they can go against that logistical challenge posed by the Philippine government.
Okay, maraming salamat po, Attorney Andres. Attorney Gilbert Andres, Deputy Executive Director of the Center for International Law or Center Law Philippines. If we're basing off numbers from Philippine authorities, just how much casualties from the Duterte drug war are we looking at? Tonight's big numbers come from three sources. The Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency pegs drug war deaths since 2016 up to April this year at a little more than 6,000. The PNP has a higher count of 7,884 for roughly the same period. But the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights says the number could be up to 3 times more. Other human rights groups estimate the death toll could be as high as 27,000.
These are the other big stories tonight. Metro Manila and Bulacan will remain under GCQ, but with looser restrictions this time. And as for 21 provinces, mobility curbs have been heightened to modified ECQ. But even as COVID infections have generally plateaued in the country and even declined in NCR, health experts warn there's been a rise in ICU occupation in hospitals. And find out which cagers made it to the Gilas Pilipinas roster in their bout against South Korea. These big stories after the break.
Good evening, I'm Robbie Alampay. You're still watching The Big Story. Metro Manila and surrounding provinces, collectively known as NCR Plus, will stay under GCQ with some modifications. But what do these changes actually mean? Maricel Halili explains.
The whole NCR Plus will stay under General Community Quarantine or GCQ until the end of the month. Just like before, it's GCQ with a twist. Cavite, Laguna, and Rizal were placed under GCQ with heightened restrictions, while GCQ with some restrictions has been imposed in Metro Manila and Bulacan. What's the difference between the new terminologies? Capacity level. In regular GCQ, indoor dining can be accommodated up to 50%, while outdoor dining or alfresco can open freely up to 100%. With the case of NCR and Bulacan, indoor dining can be allowed up to 40% only. Restaurants with safety seal certification may be allowed an extra 10%. Alfresco dining may be allowed up to 50%. In Cavite, Laguna, and Rizal, indoor dining is only up to 20%, while outdoor dining is allowed 50% capacity. Gyms and indoor sports venues will remain closed in Cavite, Laguna, and Rizal. In Metro Manila and Bulacan, it can be opened up to 30% pending safety seal certification. In areas with regular GCQ, gyms may operate up to 50% capacity. Pala says traveling to areas with different community quarantine classifications is still not allowed except for a few cases.
Except for obtaining essential goods, for work, at saka kung meron pong point-to-point travel, complying with the guidelines issued by the Department of Tourism.
President Duterte also appealed to the public to stay at home as much as possible.
Kung may panahon lang may ibang panahon lang na magawa mo yan, do it at some other time.
Despite a general plateau in the COVID-19 case trend, more areas were placed under stricter Modified Enhanced Community Quarantine or MECQ. This includes 8 provinces in Luzon, 3 in Visayas, and 10 in Mindanao. Health officials attribute the case spike in these areas to lower observance of minimum public health standards and incidents of mass gatherings. For News 5, Maricel Halili, We Are One News.
If the Philippine College of Physicians were to have their way, they would like the government to hold off on further easing the restrictions in the NCR Plus bubble. Speaking on One News Chiefs, PCP President Dr. Maricar Limpin said there has been a rise in ICU utilization in the region, with COVID patients occupying beds for at least 3 weeks. They're asking the authorities to tighten borders in the NCR Plus as they see the trend continuing. In its latest bulletin, the Health Department said less than 50% of ICU beds in Metro Manila are used up, but Limpin says on-the-ground experience shows otherwise.
I have seen this at least sa heart center. I asked my friend from San Lazaro, ganun din ang situation nila. I asked my friend in Chinese Gen, not 100% pero nearly 100%.
Time for our next look at some of the day's big stories. The Supreme Court has ordered a Marcos crony to pay the government 1.1 billion pesos in damages for his role in the construction of the Bataan nuclear power plant. The SC held Herminio Dicini liable for taking advantage of his close ties with the late dictator. The late Dicini had allegedly received $50 million as commission for the shelved project. The United States Embassy in Manila has welcomed the President's move to once again suspend the abrogation of the Visiting Forces Agreement. The embassy said the Philippine-U.S. alliance strengthens the rules-based order that benefits all Indo-Pacific nations. The Defense Department also supported the move, saying that the VFA upholds national interest. And the Philippines has extended its travel ban on India and 6 other countries until the end of June. That's part of efforts to prevent the spread of the highly contagious Delta variant. The BI said it would immediately launch repatriation flights for kababayans in the 7 countries once existing restrictions are lifted. Now for the big story in sports. The Samahang Basketball ng Pilipinas has announced the final 12-man lineup for the South Korea game tomorrow. Kai Soto and Ange Kwame will make their highly anticipated debut for Gilas Pilipinas. And also making their first showing for the senior team are RJ Abarientos, SJ Belangel, and Carl Tamayo. They are joined by Justin Baltazar, Javi Gomez Del Llano, William Navarro, Mike Nieto, Dwight Ramos, JD Tungcab, and team captain Isaac Go. Gilas needs only one win in the qualifiers to enter the 2021 FIBA Asia Cup. And prior to the announcement of the final 12, the SBP also announced that Tab Baldwin will be the head tactician for Gilas' upcoming games. But how does he plan on handling a young team like this, especially against powerhouse nations? Coach Tab reveals his game plan in this exclusive interview. 5 years since his last stint with the national team, Gilas Pilipinas Program Director Tab Baldwin is back to calling the shots. Coach Tab has been tasked to serve as Gilas head coach in the squad's upcoming tournaments, including the 2021 FIBA Asia Cup qualifiers in Pampanga and the 2021 FIBA Olympic qualifying tournament in Serbia come July.
First of all, thank you, Gretchen. It's nice to be congratulated for something. I was responsible for most of that as the program director. So, I really want to step in there now. And the pressure is on right now, I think, given the competition that we have with Korea and then Indonesia.
The 12-man pool is already complete, with key players Matt Nieto, Dave Ildefonso, and Ray Suerte sitting out due to injuries. But the thing is, the team has yet to play a single game together due to the pandemic. So how then can the squad battle it out with game-tested teams like Korea and Indonesia?
I was very encouraged by the scrimmage. We're looking forward to getting on the court tonight for a short workout, just make some adjustments.
Despite that, Coach Tab is casting his sights long-term for the young squad, especially for the 2023 FIBA World Cup.
We want to see a team and field a team in the World Cup in the Philippines that is capable of winning games with the major powers in the country, like a Serbia or like a United States.
Naturalized center Ange Kwame will reinforce Gilas, along with Kai Soto, who recently arrived from the U.S. But their entry also comes with a challenge.
But the big issue really is both of them need a significant amount of international basketball experience, and neither have any. But it's also the only way that these young boys will mature into, seasoned professionals.
Despite the young and inexperienced team on his hands, Baldwin reminds the boys that they are on home court, playing for a country that is not just basketball hungry, but also in need of some good news amid the pandemic.
There's going to be always a lot of pressure. So a little bit more pressure isn't a bad thing. Will we fight to win? Unquestionably.
Gretchen Ho, we are One News. Time for another quick break. When we return, a supporter of Isambayan believes it's time to shed the anti-Duterte strategy if opposition even wants to have a chance in the 2022 polls. And Korean heartthrob Park Seo-joon is rumored to be making a Hollywood debut, and in a massive way at that. There's talk that he will be entering the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Details after the break.
Good evening, I'm Robbie Alampay. You're still watching The Big Story. At least one political scientist believes the Isambayan coalition may have to do away with the anti-Duterte strategy if it hopes to win in the 2022 elections. Mobile journalist Jacob Lazaro gives us a front seat to this story.
The One Sambayan coalition was hoping to rally the opposition behind a tandem that was unmistakably anti-Duterte. But One Sambayan supporter and former Ateneo School of Government Dean Antonio Lavinia says the opposition coalition will have to change its strategy if it hopes to have a chance of winning in 2022. Lavinia says the pro versus anti-Duterte playbook is not working for the opposition.
Maybe the winnable alternative to a Duterte-endorsed or Duterte camp candidate ay yung candidate na hindi maging anti-Duterte but has a positive message.
This much was clear on Saturday when One Sambayan named its 6 nominees. 2 nominees immediately begged off. 2 more said they were still undecided.
I have no real political ambitions, but if I have to do the political process to serve my country, our country, ay gagawin ko naman.
The 5th nominee, VP Leni Robredo, will only decide in September. Only the 6th nominee, Antonio Trillanes, is determined to run.
Number one, hindi pa ito yung final list. Our process will require, after publication of the nominees list, a wide consultation.
Lavinia says the opposition has to be more open and inclusive to other candidates not fully identified with the opposition.
It's actually better to have 2 or 3 that are non-Duterte, so we actually have a choice.
Luis, though, for his part, says there are 3 non-negotiables for the coalition. These are the issues of extrajudicial killings, the West Philippine Sea, and the rule of law. The tricky part is finding a candidate that can stand by these issues, even if he or she doesn't necessarily stand against President Duterte. I'm Jacob Lazaro, and we are One News.
Let's take a look at the biggest stories on print and online. Vice President Leni Robredo's wealth tripled in 2020 after inheriting cash and properties from her mother, who died last year. The Philippine Star obtained a copy of Robredo's SALN showing her wealth at nearly 12 million pesos in 2020, up from just 3.5 million in 2019. But that could still change, according to Robredo, once her family settles matters pertaining to their mother's estate. The cities of Manila and Butuan made it to the top 50 champion cities in the world. Bloomberg Philanthropies ranked over 600 cities worldwide for their innovative solutions. Butuan City made use of predictive data to boost farmers' productivity, while Manila banked on data infrastructure to modernize the city. They will move on to the next phase of the challenge for a chance to be among 15 winners of $1 million to implement their programs. And from News 5, Cagayan de Oro Congressman Rufus Rodriguez singles out vaccine czar Carlito Galvez for failing to provide adequate vaccine supply to high-risk areas in Mindanao. Rodriguez did not mince his words, saying Galvez is to blame for the COVID-19 deaths in the city. Cagayan de Oro averaged over 100 new cases last week, the 4th highest among areas outside NCR.
In world news, NATO leaders said China poses a systematic challenge to the alliance's security as it undermines international order. During the summit, U.S. President Joe Biden urged his fellow NATO leaders to stand up to China's authoritarianism and growing military might. But China's mission to the European Union told NATO to stop exaggerating the so-called China threat theory. Beijing accused NATO of manifesting its Cold War mentality.
I'm not what you think I am.
Captain Marvel meets Park Seo-joon. The Korean superstar has reportedly booked a ticket into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. According to Soonpi, Seo-joon will appear in the upcoming sequel, The Marvels. If true, he will be the second Korean actor joining the MCU after Dr. Ma Dong-suk of Eternals. Soljun's agency has yet to release an official statement. Over in the home front, singer-actress Nadine Lustre is still tied with Viva. The Quezon City Regional Trial Court has ruled that Lustre must honor her contract with the artist agency. She must also cease and desist from new contracts without Viva's consent and participation. It was in December 2019 when Nadine revoked her 20-year contract with Viva, calling it oppressive. But the Stars Camp believes they still have the upper hand as Viva cannot touch her hard-earned 28 million pesos off of the agency.
Nadine is grateful to Viva for what they have done for her, but not in a situation where forever na lang siya being oppressed under a one-sided agreement.
For News 5, MJ Marfori, we are One News.
The story of a 25-year-old student is making rounds on social media after she finished college by selling chicharon at saka mani. Meet Jemima Joy Salas, the self-professed mani queen, and Ate Charon. Jemima just earned her entrepreneurship degree from Laguna University, and she's had the makings of a diligent entrepreneur early on. Jemima sold snacks in school during break time. Then she had to be independent when her parents separated, and she was compelled to work even harder when her breadwinner Lola died in 2014. And now that she reached the finish line, Jemima celebrated by posing with her paninda kasama pa suka.
Madaming breakdown pero meron ding breakthrough. Yun lang, ang advice ko lang, kahit anong mangyari, wag nang susukuan yung mga pangarap nyo.
Ang
Tayo
talino,
kay
galing.
Jemima.
Oo.
Diba?
Mani Queen and Ate Charon. Galing na marketing niya, no?
Oh, kaya pagka nakakita ako sa kalye, di ba, may mga ganyan, nagbebenta para raw sa tuition nila. Talagang manlalambot yung puso mo. Tapos makikita may mga story ang ganito. Siguro ganyan talaga nangyayari. Idolo ka, Jemima.
We
Mabuhay
should
ka.
take from her, especially in this pandemic. Congratulations sa pag-graduate at sana marami rin na gumaya tulad mo, magbenta rin at makapagtapos sa pag-aaral. Oo, di ba?
Basta sikap, kakayanin yan.
Well, that wraps up today's big story. Catch us again tomorrow at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250.
Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. Mask on.
Wash hands.
And stay safe, Philippines. I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. We are One News. Have a good evening.